Well, let's proceed to the topic of the talk. It's counseling mischief as a thought crime. The speaker is Joe Browser. And it's about a country which surveys its own people during the Olympic Games and almost imprisoned security researchers. Which names pop up in your head? For me, it was first China, maybe Iran, but who would have thought that it's actually Canada? And I think Joe's really excited to give us the details about this. Okay. So give him a warm applause and enjoy the talk.
Okay. I know my mic. Yeah. Hi, everyone. So yeah, this is Counseling Mischief as Thought Crime. I'm Joe Bowser. My day job's working on a web framework, but I also write articles for the Vancouver Media Co-op. And whatever's not good enough for the Vancouver Media Co-op, I post on my blog. So before we begin, I'd just like to, I'm not going to publish anything about this particular incident, but I'd like to just mention the case of Byron Sana, the G20. He was a security researcher who looked at the G20 security theater and unfortunately ended up being preemptively arrested before the G20 began. If you want more information on the case, I recommend going to freebyron.org. So I'm going to just begin now. We're going to begin with a George Orwell quote. He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future. This is especially true when you're talking about the International Olympic Committee. The International Olympic Committee is this group, this corporation that I believe headquartered in Geneva that goes from city to city hosting these Olympic Games. And they get these corporate sponsors who try and get a complete monopoly over all public space during the Games. And so these companies will usually include Coca-Cola, a national bank like the Royal Bank of Scotland or the Royal Bank of Canada, which will fund the tar sands. Or they can also include the local telecom company like Bell Canada during the Winter Olympics or BT during London. So keep this in mind because I'm going to show you examples in a few minutes. So first, we're going to just go through some background. Since this is an international audience, I have no idea what your familiarity is with Canadian law enforcement in the security apparatus in Canada. So I'm going to try and start from the beginning. I hope I don't spend too much time on it or completely confuse you guys. We're going to talk about what qualifies as a threat to the Olympics in Canada, like how I became a threat. We're going to talk about access to information in Canada, which is the Canadian version of freedom of information. We're going to talk about documents between the G20 and the Olympics because the Olympics were the practice round for the G20 in Toronto. Everything that they tried out in Vancouver was like a test run for what they did in Toronto. And then we're going to talk about open source surveillance techniques, that is using publicly available data on the internet through social networks, Twitter, Facebook, and published information to build profiles on people. And of course, where do we go from here? So this is Vancouver. This is my home. See, this is a picture someone took. This is the Lionsgate Bridge. You can see the Shaw Tower. It's a really nice place. It's one of the most unaffordable places in the world. It's the third largest city in Canada. It's got a long history of civil disobedience. So Greenpeace was founded out of Vancouver. There is a radical anarchist group called the Squamish Five that came out of Vancouver. They did direct action, which involved blowing up power stations in the 1980s. And the Woodward Squat also was in Vancouver, where people actually took over a building in the downtown east side and demanded social housing. And they partially won. It depends on who you ask about that last part. And I'd like to take the time right now to mention that Vancouver is on unceded Coast Salish territory, and that Vancouver also has Canada's poorest postal code, which is in the downtown east side. So since Vancouver is a place that rains instead of snows, people from all across Canada go to the milder climates, and they end up in the downtown east side where there's issues with mental health issues, drug abuse, and just plain being homeless. And there's always a lot of groups that try and help these people, but there's also a lot of pressure to move these people along and to criminalize the poor. And I'm not making this last part up. British Columbia, its official motto is the best place on earth. That's a pretty pompous motto, but if you go to thebestplaceonearth.ca, you'll actually see I'm not making this up. It's real. They actually think they're the best place on earth, on the entire planet. Now, that's a pretty crazy arrogance. You wouldn't expect that from Canada, right? Like, best place on earth. So I'm going to talk about what unceded territory actually means, because this is actually a really important point. So Canada, before it was Canada, had the First Nations people. Now, in the rest of Canada, they had treaties, and there is like interaction between white people and the First Nations. But in British Columbia, most of the land never had treaties. It was just sort of annexed one day and enclosed by the Indian Act when British Columbia was created and made a province. So there's all these outstanding land claims. Now, Vancouver itself, when they did the Olympics, they decided they didn't want issues with the First Nations people, so they created the 4 host nations, which are these bands that existed, and they made a business deal with the Squamish, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Lil'wat up in Whistler. So that was they talked to the elected chiefs who were elected through the Indian Act, and that was their official native support for the Olympics. When they said they had the support of the native peoples, they had the support of those 4 native peoples. Those aren't the only native peoples in the Vancouver area. There's lots of others like the Kwantlen, and there's that native group that I completely zoned out of that actually protested a bridge during the Olympics. That happened to be over their burial ground. And then there's also the displaced First Nations that end up in the downtown east side. So in Canada, a lot of the population in the prisons and homeless people on the street are First Nations people, who because of long history of repression against First Native people, and since they're the primary target of federal government oppression. If you even see in the WikiLeaks cables, or if you look at other leaked documents where they talk about how people are spying on First Nations people, they're the primary targets of state repression in Canada. Okay, come on. What? Oh, 1 second. That's interesting. Okay, so we're having technical difficulties. Why can't I go? Oh, that's weird. Okay, so I'm sorry about this. For some reason, my slide seems to be stuck on this unceded territory slide. So I can keep going. I'll talk. Does anyone have any questions thus far? Come on. I'm trying. Oh, there we go. Let's try this now. I'm sorry about that. It's I had to bring this computer since I'm traveling through the United States. So this computer is like a really slow computer that if it gets seized, I'm not exactly totally upset about. I mean, I'll be upset. So we're going to talk about the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They're the national law enforcement agency in Canada. So that's a picture of a Mountie on a horse, the stereotypical picture of the police. They're the federal police force, which was really designed as the Northwest Mounted Police. They're meant to go on the frontier and like tame the frontier of Canada and make it safe for settlers to come in. They're similar to the FBI in the United States and the state troopers. So they have their offices in Ottawa where they conduct their electronic surveillance, their physical surveillance, data forensics, and then they also have their detachments where they have their state trooper type people, like the RCMP constables who drive along the highway and check if you're speeding. So in the 1950s, they were also in charge of national security. So things they used to do back in the 50s is they had this program called Pro-Funk, which is the prominent functionaries of the Communist Party, where they planned to round up all the communists, their families, and any of their friends, and put them in camps. This program kept going until 1984, when it was stopped by accident. And then they also burned a barn, had a list of FLQ supporters, and because of all this, they ended up losing the ability to do security work in Canada. They still dealt with security of mega events, and they pepper sprayed a bunch of people at APEC and strip searched them, and that was part of the APEC inquiry, which is this big thing that happened in Vancouver in 1998, 1 year before Seattle. And then the people who took over, of course, are the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS. They spy on Canadians. I suspect one of them is in the audience. Hi. They're most similar to MI5 in the UK, FBI counterintelligence, but they do go into foreign countries and spy on Canadians. Canada doesn't have a foreign agency that spies on foreign targets. They rely on other allied countries to do this. So it's at least not officially have a group. They're not a law enforcement agency, so if they ask questions, you can tell them to go away. You don't even need to say, am I being detained? You can just be like, no, bye. And they also funded a white supremacist group, the Heritage Front. And this is actually a weird story. They funded this group, and they had this guy, Grant Bristow, get into this group, and he ended up being the de facto leader of the group. So CSIS ended up having this mole that turned out to run the Heritage Front, and then he, left and disbanded it, and that was the end of that. And then they also leak documents when it's to their political advantage. So what happened? This is brand new news. So what happened recently is there's this guy, Alder Zarek, who was imprisoned in a Canadian embassy in Syria and then sent back to Canada. He's on a UN watch list for terrorists, and he's nearly about to get off. CSIS leaked some documents saying that he was going to put a bomb on a plane from Montreal to Paris, right before he was about to get off the UN watch list. And I'm pretty sure they did it on purpose. All right, so this introduces the great unit that targeted me. This is the Vancouver 2010 Integrated Security Unit. This consists of local police departments, like the Vancouver Police above, the West Vancouver Police. It also consists of the Border Guards, which are the Canada Border Services Agency, the Canadian Security, and there's the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and it's all headed by the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And it also contained the Canadian military, which includes the Canadian version of the NSA, which is the the Communications Security Establishment of Canada. The Integrated Security Unit is a new type of unit that was invented for mega events, like the Olympics and the G20. So this is the Vancouver version because we don't have provincial police and and most towns don't have city police. It was mostly the RCMP. And this is a new model that they propose so that they can have integrated response to terrorism. And of course, then there's the other side, which is the anti-Olympics convergence. This is the poster for the convergence that happened in February 2010 in Coast Salish territory. No Olympics on stolen native land. This was originally called in 2007 by the Native 2010 Resistance in Mexico. Some people from the territory said, we're going to resist the games, we're going to get a convergence, people are going to come together and protest the Olympics, and then that's how the Olympic Resistance Network came to be. And the Olympic Resistance Network wasn't one of these other groups that was covert and doing direct actions of mass property damage. They were an open group that anyone can go and join. So they had above ground groups, such as the Anti-Poverty Committee, who did the Woodward Squat, and this immigration rights group called No One Is Illegal that joined, as well as many other activists and anarchists. Meetings were open, and they were held at the local info shop, Spartacus Books. So here's where I start to come into the picture. I volunteered at Spartacus. I was on the board of directors, which means that when you're on the board of directors of a bookstore, that's a society that can own things, you're listed as the owner. It's an anarchist collective. No one actually owns the bookstore. I joined the Olympic Resistance Network for my own reasons. I opposed the Olympics. I thought they were a waste of money. I was told when going through university that BC didn't have any money, and then we won the Olympics. I was pretty upset, and I became a person of interest, not because of joining the Olympic Resistance Network, but because I was on the board of Spartacus. And this is an old newspaper clipping where I protest the Spirit train. Here's one where I'm once again in the shot with the two high-profile ORN people, wearing my OpenBSD hoodie. And this is about Spartacus. Spartacus is one of the oldest radical bookstores. It's nothing too special about Spartacus except that it's old and it's like a main hub. It burnt up in a fire in 2004 and rebuilt and moved to 684 East Hastings Street in Vancouver. So it's in Strathcona on the other side of the downtown east side. It hosted the ORN meetings, and it's one of many radical bookstores that were profiled. Others were Chemist Books and Black Raven Books. So this is Spartacus. It has a lolcat. And here's what Spartacus looks like after I got the files from the RCMP. Third-party rule, do not disseminate this Google map. So they're conducting physical surveillance based on a Google map of the radical bookstore. The RCMP attempted to visit me twice during the time when I was involved. They first visited on June 4th, 2009. I know that date because of the birthday, and they also visited on January 19th, 2010, where they waited 5 hours outside my work. But before the police visits, I didn't know I was profiled. I mean, I showed up at some meetings and like volunteered at the bookstore. It wasn't like I was, actually showing up to like serious protests. I was just some guy. And then there's a torch relay where people across the country protested the torch relay and tried to disrupt it. And it started in Victoria. And because it started in Victoria, Victoria activists were reviewed first, including an owner of a bookstore where people just read anarchist literature. Now, if you have to go to a lot of anarchist readings, they're very boring. So, I mean, it's like, oh no, they're going to drink coffee. So despite police harassment, the Olympic torch is blocked in numerous times, and most notably in Vancouver, it's blocked twice. Once in the downtown east side and once on Commercial Drive. Unfortunately, I can't show you a YouTube video because the IOC blocked it on copyright. So, and of course, I can't show you this other festival or resistance video on YouTube because they also blocked that on copyright. The IOC uses copyright to silence dissent when it can. So when they actually have a solid claim on the Olympic rings, or someone getting chased off of the drive, or some big disruption, they're like, no, we own the copyright to your protest on YouTube. In addition, they passed this bylaw called illegal signage. So in your home, if you were in a nearby Olympic venue and you put a sign up, the police have power to go into your home, your private property, take the sign, arrest you, throw you in jail, and fine you $20,000. That's not what the actual final bylaw said, but that's what the province allowed the city of Vancouver to do for the Olympics. So, no free speech, pretty much. And then there's also, during the debate about illegal signage, people from the Olympic Resistance Network showed up and they're like, no, we don't like this illegal signage. And then as they were walking out of City Hall, the police showed up and said, hey, we're the Vancouver 2010 Integrated Security Unit Joint Intelligence Group. We'd like to talk to you. So even if you went through like the established democratic channels to talk to your elected representatives, you were targeted by the police and you were harassed by the police. Then they talked about these free speech zones or safe assembly areas. They're called safe assembly areas because if you go outside of them, the police will beat the crap out of you. The debate over the free speech during the Olympics remained in the forefront while everything else took a back seat. This caused a lot of people to leave, and they're like, I can't be bothered to do this. I'm going to get harassed by the police, and it's not worth it. I'm staying home. And a lot of other people were like, you know what? I don't even care about the Olympics anymore. I hate the police. They're like, God damn those people. So the Olympics happened. Another group was formed, the 2010 Welcoming Committee, that sent a 2,000-person protest in Vancouver against the Olympics, and no one notices. No one notices. It's not in the history books. It's not even a footnote. I don't know if it's the biggest protest against the Olympics, because those aren't in the history books. Heart Attack, though, is in the history books because it's 200 anarchists smashing the Olympic Superstore. The Hudson's Bay Company had a big tourist store, and some people smashed the window and threw some paint and put a newspaper box through it. This actually ended up in a U.S. diplomatic cable because the march ended up 3 blocks from the U.S. U.S. consulate. And then there was an Olympic tent city that was set up for 2 weeks during the Olympics in an empty lot, protesting homelessness. So here's the picture of the Take Back Our City rally at the Art Gallery. All protests in Vancouver happened at the art gallery. If you weren't from there, you'd think we hated art. And there's the ugly Olympic clock right there. And here's 2010 heart attack. This is the protest that most people remember about the Olympics in Vancouver. They're like, those people, they smashed all that stuff. And then, however, the property damage wasn't even nearly as close as what happened during the last Stanley Cup riot. It was like 2 smashed windows versus like half the windows in Vancouver smashed in downtown. But this is remembered. And of course it ends, and they say it's a success. And even though they spent $1 billion on security, on cameras and fences, and on radio equipment and surveillance. So what do they spend the money on, and like what the hell? What happened here? So an organizer of the Olympic Resistance Network, Mima, was charged with counseling mischief over $5,000 during the 2010 Games. They were a leader, and their charge was eventually dropped because there was no solid evidence of this. And it's the first time I heard the counseling mischief charge was in February. And I was like, well, that's kind of strange. I mean, saying do whatever you want, I don't care, is not really counseling mischief. It's basically saying I'm not responsible for you. And here's the law from the criminal code, counseling mischief. It's a wall of text. I don't expect anyone to read it. But this is the actual law. And here's what it is. Bob says that smashing things is cool. Alice smashes something. Bob and Alice both go to jail. This goes against the concept of personal responsibility. Like I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, my parents would say, you know, if it was cool and everyone else was jumping off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff? And things like that. And it can be used for any politically fiery speech, like, I think this bench should be torn down, or I think that we should disrupt this meeting. Like fiery speech. It's just like, well, you're counseling mischief. You can't do that in Canada. That's non-reasonable. What you have to do is we have to, be quiet and just sort of let them do their thing. And this includes things like Twitter and Facebook, of course. And this is where things get really interesting. So in Canada, we have the Privacy Act, and we also have the Access to Information Act. So a government agency is required to give you the information about yourself that they have. Now, they have a bunch of laws that they can use to redact that information, such as national security. The head of the department may not want it released. They may have secret informants that they need to protect. They may have all these other issues. One of them is also other people's privacy. So if you're in a file with other people, you won't get that file because you can actually expose other people. So I was already visited, so I obviously have a file. So I got the files. And I got a picture with my CCC shirt. So we also have the FOI legislation called the Access to Information Act. So the files I got weren't the complete story. For example, I got this file that had a list of anarchists, and I was on that list because of like a blog post I did. I need more files, so I requested more files from the RCMP, CSIS, CSE, and the CBSA. And I only really get files from the RCMP. CSIS sends me a receipt and says we can't really tell you anything. CBSA sends me something, but it's a big sheet of white paper that has a title. What I did find out, though, was that the V2010 ISU was tracking my activities based on my old blog, which was just like, a crappy blog where I just wrote about like random things that popped in my head, as well as Facebook, which I didn't actually use. I just connected my Twitter to my Facebook because my mom was like, no, don't quit Facebook. Then I can't see what you're doing. Yeah, maybe that's the idea. And then there's over 600 pages reviewed, and I only got 80 of them. And they were concerned I was going to hack the Olympic Games, and they said I was a critical threat to Olympics infrastructure. And I became priority 3 or something. Yeah. So I'm also the co-founder of Vancouver Hackspace. I have a passing interest in RFID. I did some mesh stuff in Vancouver for a while, and I like playing with GSM. GSM's fun. I also work at a software company that shall remain nameless right now. I'm sure if you Google it, you can find it. Please don't ask me about it. Right now, I'm on vacation. And in short, I'm just a typical hacker that we found pretty much everywhere. So I went to 25C3, and the police were scared because I went to a scary HackerCon in Europe. And they translated parts of the site from German, and here's the file. So here's where they translated newspeak and surveillance societies, the right to digital identity, and they said I was going to check stuff out. That sounds sinister. Totally sinister. Then I went to Google I/O for work, and they were concerned that I was going to the Bay Area for Maker Faire. They wrote a tiny part of the report about Maker Faire, and a lot of it's redacted. And they tried to make it sound evil. There was like, in recent tweets, Bowser refers to finding a permanent space for the Vancouver Hacker Society in order to become 24 hours. Bowser recently returned from 4th Annual Maker Faire, held in San Mateo, California, May 30th to 31st, 2009. The Maker Faire is an annual do-it-yourself event which includes engineering, science, technology, and other things. Other things? With a footnote? So, one thing I did do that probably, this is like the thing that got me in the most trouble, was I was interested in a talk that happened at 24C3. I believe it was 24C3. I might have got it mixed up with 23C3, about RFID and FIFA and Beijing Olympic tickets. So I was interested, are they still using this in Vancouver? So I wanted to see if I can get some tickets, and they're like, oh, you're trying to get fraudulent passes. So I did this evil thing, and I grabbed my credit card, went to the website, and bought some cheap tickets to a crappy concert I didn't want to go to, just so I could see if they had RFID. And then I found out they didn't, and sold them on their scalping system. I know, it's horrible. Here's the tickets, I got to keep them. So all they are is cardstock, and you can get this hologram absolutely everywhere. So if you buy a $5 Quachi doll and take the stupid hologram out and stick it on some cardstock, you already have a new ticket. Like, this is it. This is the whole ticket, and this is the nice ticket. They also had the really crappy tickets. Our tickets to other events we had after the Olympics, they had more security than this. And this is the check I got from VanOck. So, yeah. And so this made me the critical threat to the Olympic infrastructure that I am today. They were afraid that I was going to forge the passes and we were going to get in and disrupt the torch in the Olympics and cause a big mess. So here's the short list of the people who are going to get the false accreditation passes. And here I am, where I was the organizer of the 2009 Vancouver Anarchist Book Fair and affiliated with ORN and the Anti-Poverty Committee. And I'm technologically savvy and active in the hacking community. What? Really? I mean, I started a hackerspace. I mean, we play with Arduinos. So, Constable George Zalazi, who I'll get to later, I'll get to now, because he gathered a list on everyone that was covered. This was the persons of interest list, which mostly consisted of anarchists and other people at this time when I got the files. They went to my home since I was at work. They ended up giving my partner a card. They demanded to know her name. She said, I don't need to give you my name. You know, like, bye. After a group of people from the Olympic Resistance Network were visited, we approached a local civil liberties group, the BC Civil Liberties Association, drafted a letter and said, please don't visit us. If you wish to contact us through our lawyer. And that actually worked. And we had a big press release. It got into news that we were being harassed, and the visit stopped. Here's the actual file from the visit. You tell that they redacted some of it, and I redacted like my old home address when I released this file. Just because I didn't want people to know where I lived by downloading my documents. So they kept compiling this list. There's there's possibly more than 400 people on this list. I have no idea because they won't tell me the number. I sent a request being like, how many people are on this list? And then they sent me the type of people that were on the list, but not the number. I'm like, but if I guess, that's not in the public interest. So I sent a complaint to the Information Commissioner of Canada, and that's still being processed. They have a massive backlog. And this is the POI list. This indicates that I was flagged on Prime, which is a police database, and they have lists of anarchists, and they have Aboriginal activists, groups from No 2010 Victoria, the Olympic Resistance Network, and then other, which could be anyone, including the BCCLA. So basically, anyone that was an enemy of the ISU was on this list, and it was, I have no idea, like, how many people are on this list beyond that. And it's also one of the most popular downloaded documents because they're like, there was a list, and it was a secret list. So the chilling effects of all the visits were that a lot of people dropped out of the Olympics, like a lot of moderate people and the people that were just, they didn't like the Olympics, but they didn't want to be troubled by the police. They decided to totally disengage from the whole thing. They're like, you know what? I'm staying home. I'm leaving town. Screw this. And other people got super like, the people left got super dedicated and super like, you know what? Forget the police. We're going to do this thing, and it's going to be this way. And that definitely affected the composition and the tactics used. So things got a lot more radicalized, and that's how things went down. So at this time, I left Spartacus and I went to HAR. I stopped going to the meetings because they were kind of dumb. At the time, we talked about the same things every single week, and I could always just get the minutes. So I just went to my one group that organized where people were going to stay. And yeah, someone who later I revealed to be, who I think, pretty sure it's an undercover police officer, because when I called them, they said, hi, I lost my phone. If you need to get a hold of me, call Jig Intel. You know, hi, I'm a cop. You know, that's what happened when I called their cell phone. They ended up resorting to using open source surveillance techniques. So they ended up going to criminologists who spent all day surfing the internet. They then talked to CBSA, who stopped me in the airport. And I had to stay for a half hour, and I searched my own bag to avoid this laptop from being seized. So the second police visit, they were waiting outside my office in Gastown, which is nearby the downtown east side, and they waited there for 5 hours to talk to me. I didn't talk to them. They followed me into a grocery store, and they threw a card at me. And I walked into the grocery store because I used to go to that grocery store as soon as it opened. And since I was a regular customer and the police wasn't, he'd have to blow his cover to like not get kicked out by the regular security guard. And this is the last time I hear from them, or so I thought. Here's the document where it says I don't talk to the police. So this is disturbing because other well-known activists have also been arrested and even convicted with the charge of counseling an offense not committed. People have convicted activists with nothing but a YouTube video and a Twitter feed with retweets of Dead Prez lyrics. If they could be convicted with a Twitter feed being like, yeah, I don't like you, then they convict anyone. They can just make things up. The RCMP set up a unit to monitor, later during the G20, to do nothing but monitor the internet and collect intelligence. They're the internet monitoring unit. All I got when I asked about this was their objective: to monitor all open source, to monitor internet, to relay stuff on Twitter, and to talk to the analytics team, which is a bunch of criminologists. So we're going to talk about not committed. Like, you know, this is the law again about crimes that have not been committed. And again, Eve tells Bob to smash things. Bob doesn't smash anything. Bob thinks it's dumb. Eve goes to jail. So I requested information after the G8, G20 summits, and once I got the information requested, from the V20, 10ISU, and the G8, G20. And then I talked to journalists about it, saying, like, has anyone else done an ATIP on this? Like, is anyone else digging? And I found Tim Groves from Toronto, and he's recently done a lot of digging, and he's going to be releasing a document called the G20 Papers sometime in the next week or two, which is going to have my documents and his documents from the G20, which will reveal more information about how the police surveilled activists using regular physical means as well as electronic means. And we'll have information about police infiltrators, agent provocateurs, and other things related to the investigation of the G8, G20, and the Olympics. But he did get a document called the Baseline for the Primary Investigation Team. So the Primary Intelligence Investigative Team, which has a mandate of basically profiling all these people: Tamil activists, anarchists, socialists, animal rights, because they can all be anarchists. Because, you know, since all these people can be anarchists, we have to profile them all. even though they might not be. They most likely weren't. So then there's links between the G8, G20 ISU and the V2010 ISU. So they're following people around across the country as they are going to protests. So this shows that they were trying to find some conspiracy links between these two groups that didn't really exist. And I got some tactical intelligence reports as well as the PIT baseline that show this. So the PIT baseline shows this article, this paragraph, which talks about the torch relay and about how activists across the country disrupted the torch relay. And of course, this is a big wall of text, so I'll just show you this instead, which is, well, that's pretty clear as day. Anti-G8, G20 activist participation in the anti-2010 Olympic convergence. A list of all the groups that participated in both. These are the public enemy #1 to the RCMP for just going to protests. A lot of people do this summit hopping, and if you do summit hopping, it's bad news, according to the RCMP. They also have the document of what a suspect, a person of interest, and an associate is. And they also will just say that the person is a target in general because they can't get specific plans on what they're going to attack during the G20. Because they'll be like, I don't like the G20. And they'll be like, so what are you going to do? I don't know. And they'll be like, well, you're a target now because you said you don't like the G20. So a suspect is actually a person that's actually suspected to have done something. So they actually have some evidence, they actually have some intelligence, not evidence, intelligence, that says that they're going to do something. It's not evidence because they can't use it in court to actually convict them. They actually need that evidence first before they can actually take them to trial. So suspects are first persons of interest. Now, a person of interest is anyone who can commit something and basically has the opportunity to cause problems. So if you're a security researcher or if you're competent in any way with computers, you're a person of interest if you have a political opinion. And then, of course, there's associates who, well, basically they're just everyone who's associated with the person of interest. And of course, you can find us all through Facebook. So this is a screenshot of the photocopy I was sent from Facebook. So I had the black square to boycott something, I think it was New Zealand's law. And this is my Twitter feed where I talk about how they're using scare tactics, how they had an LRAD. Yeah, the Olympic weapon. Yeah, they bought an LRAD, which is this big sound device that's really annoying. So many anti-capitalist groups have a Facebook page because, it's Facebook. We can organize through Facebook. Facebook's great. You can all join a group and talk. Except for the fact that you have to use your real name, and of course the police go and check it out. So ORN had a Facebook group, and the officers there used mostly their real names, and they used Facebook a lot, and were profiled because of Facebook. Same with the G20. This is the G20 group, which is now the Community Solidarity Network. So people would send invites being like, 2010 heart attack, here's an invite, and then you'd be like, accept or decline. So they already know who's going to the protest. Which this is ridiculous, right? Smash windows. You're invited to smash window event, accept, decline. What? Okay. Why would you do this? I don't understand. But people did. However, the good thing about all this is that the RCP doesn't redact Facebook printouts because it's like, well, it's just the internet, man. But the thing is that that also include personal information about my friends, including my grandma. My grandma's on Facebook, and she's 74 now. So would they profile her? Would they profile my 74-year-old grandma? And this is an early Facebook layout because they change their UI all the time. And there's something interesting. This is the RCMP's Facebook username from the Vancouver 2010 Integrated Security Unit. So they used a synonym, which is a violation of the Facebook Terms of Service. Yes. Also, they started visiting websites and blogs, but they don't use Tor or IDP or any proxies or anything. They just show up with their IP address, a By the way, you can Google this online, so I'm okay with putting the RCMP's IP here. And with their user agent, they're using Internet Explorer 6, and it's InfoWeb approved. This is especially the RCMP. This is only the RCMP that has InfoWeb approved in their user agent. And none of the other Canadian agencies use any proxies, use any anonymizing software either. And they all have different user agents that have who they are in them. So, yeah, if you want to just check if you're being surveilled, just grep your Apache logs or your Nginx logs. This is from the Vancouver Hackspace log, and it talks about the Vancouver Hacker Society. Okay. So what we can learn from all this is that intelligence isn't evidence. So intelligence is rumors, things that we think are true that aren't. They got my name wrong 3 or 4 times in the documents before CBSA corrected them with the data from my passport. They can spy on you and not get anything at all. And yeah, the quality of information is just totally dubious. I sound way more badass on paper than I am in real life. This is all ideological. Working at a radical bookstore is what got me on the list. Visiting 25C3 made me a critical threat. There's safety in numbers. So remember how I mentioned that we got a letter from the BC Civil Liberties Association? That's actually really good because then you can actually start class actions and do things to actually fight back when you're actually in a political group. Whereas if you're by yourself, unless you have money for a lawyer, it gets a lot harder, and you don't have that built-in support network. So even if you don't necessarily agree with the protest group and you think they're a bunch of flakes, because oftentimes some people in them are. I mean, we all have difficulties with people sometimes. I understand. It's better to actually join and show solidarity with that group than to go alone, because if you go alone, you're alone, and they can get you much easier. And security culture is critically important. Don't talk about things that are illegal. You have the right to remain silent. Even in Canada, you still had the right to remain silent. You don't have to tell them anything. You can say, I want to talk to my lawyer. You can share stories about surveillance, like what I'm doing here, and that helps people prepare for when they are surveilled themselves. And don't create Facebook events for protests. Just don't. I can't stress this enough. And finally, even though access to information is sometimes completely ineffective, in Canada it's actually some of the worst, you can actually use it to still expose a lot of information. For example, most recently I requested a document on WikiLeaks task force for Canada, and I was able to get 350 pages that someone else requested, which shows that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Canada was in direct contact with the NSA in the United States. And that's actually the most recent document I've found so far. And documents can also have glaring flaws in them, like I've noticed with the Facebook screenshot, where they have their username. Should be noted that I did not expose any RCMP officers, since I don't know who that Facebook person is. It's actually illegal to expose undercover RCMP officers in Canada. So everything's suspected, and if you ask me who the undercover is, I will not tell you. I also won't tell you anything that exposes any security agency, because that's also illegal. And here's a special thanks. I'm going to talk, this is a big long list, I'll go through it quick. My partner and my daughter for putting up with me going through this talk and being like, okay, go play with your ball. The RCMP ATIP office for giving me this information. They don't have much money, they're swamped. And they're actually somewhat helpful, even though they don't really want to help you sometimes. Vancouver Hackspace for putting up with my anti-Olympic rants and for helping me out with some of the surveillance, like the RFID stuff. Vancouver Media Co-op for letting me publish on their newswire and for providing support. Tim Groves from the Toronto Media Co-op in Briarpatch for actually publishing the G20 documents and looking more into it. Bob Mackin from 24 Hours for also helping me look through the documents. Dave Eby and the BC Civil Liberties Association for actually making sure I stayed out of jail. The Olympic Resistance Network for actually resisting the Olympics. The Toronto Community Mobilization Network for actually resisting the G20, and Chaos Computer Club for actually having me talk here today. And
Now it's time for the question and answers, and I see you still have 14 minutes, so feel free.
Hello there. I just wanted to know, were you being ironical when you said, oh, Facebook is great, you can connect to people and so on? Because I have the impression that any seriously organized political action movement would deeply rely on decentralized services, and that by its centralized nature, Facebook is bound to have your information leaked in some way or put in wrong hands. Do you?
Yeah, I was being ironic. I'm Canadian, so it might not have shown up.
Okay.
Hey.
Since you're leaving, please don't forget about the trash and your cars and put them where they belong. If no other questions, then let's thank Joe another time, and let's hope he also visits us the next time.
Okay.